Well, I think we only have an hour together, so I think we'll just get started. And as people filter in, please put your questions in the chat. I'm joined today by Melissa Beckman, one of my colleagues. Thank you so much, Melissa, for joining me today.
Glad to
She's
be
going
here,
to be,
Kristin.
I'm so happy to have you. She's going to be triaging questions for us as we just spend the next hour together. So hello, my name is Kristin Landis. I am a college consultant at Educational Connections. I've been at EC for now about 4.5 years, helping students and their families navigate and prepare for the college admissions process. There's so much noise out there right now that we thought that this would be an opportune time to just kind of pop in and kind of quell some of that noise and answer questions for you. Before I started at EC, I worked at the University of Virginia in their admissions office evaluating candidates for 11 years. So I feel like I have a good idea of what schools are looking for in applicants. And then I've also been through the process 3 times myself as a parent. So I know there's probably a lot of parents on today. So I've sat at a couple different seats at the table. And so I thought what we would do to get started is I would answer the question that I get asked more often than any other, which is, what are the colleges looking for? And so the answer to that is pretty much the candid answer in college admissions is it depends. It depends on what colleges you're looking at. It's not one size fits all, but there are certain common denominators that colleges are looking for in applicants. The first thing a college will look at when they get your student's application is to see if they are an academic fit. It's because colleges are not in the business of accepting students that they feel are going to struggle at their school. So academic fit is comprised of program rigor, grade performance, and testing if you choose to submit. And program rigor is how hard are the classes your student's taking than the person sitting next to them in English class or walking down the hall. Because students are looked at in the context of their high school. Once the school determines if an applicant is an academic fit, then a more holistic review comes in. So when I was at UVA, I was always asking myself the question, what will the student bring to my college environment? What contribution can they make both in and out of the classroom? What type of community citizen will they be? How are they going to show up? And the answer to that is seen in a couple of different parts of the application. First, how does a student choose to spend their time when they're not in school? Colleges look at the communities that they're part of to see what type of community member they're going to be at their campus. The next thing they'll look at is, what do teachers say about them? For some of you who have rising seniors, you know that your students have been asking for recommendations from their teachers. So what do they say about them? And then lastly, the dreaded 5-letter word essay. What do students say about themselves in their essays? And if you have rising seniors, I'm sure you've been dealing with that over the summer. So that's just a little recap of the college admissions process, kind of top level. And so now I know that we've got some questions coming in. So I'm going to turn it to Melissa to start giving me some of them.
Great. All right. Well, we just got a question through email from Julia, and she says, often you hear that you want to make sure the school that your child applies to is a good fit, not just in terms of size and location, but also community feel and school culture. Other than visiting a school in person, what are some other ways to learn about that?
Right. Well, since the pandemic, colleges have gotten very well versed at showing students and families what their campus is like without actually having to go to it. Because, obviously the best thing is to actually go and see a campus. And I would hope, if possible, that students will see as many of the schools on their list before they apply to them. But sometimes that's just not feasible. It's expensive, takes a lot of time. So there are a lot of resources out there that universities put out. First of all, virtual tours. They have information sessions, admissions information sessions, panels. Some schools offer alumni interviews in their areas. There are college fairs where the admissions representatives come and you can go and meet with them and ask them questions. And then the internet is your friend. There are so many resources out there. Students' own accounts. YouTube, believe it or not, is a wonderful resource for students to see what day in the life of a student is like. But there are other factors to consider besides just fit, like the vibe check, which when you're looking at schools to determine best fit. Obviously, you want to see if it's an academic fit. Do they have the majors that your student is interested in? Or do they allow the academic freedom for your student to explore varying different areas? Because for some colleges, you have to apply to specific schools straight out of the gate. And that can prohibit that kind of academic exploration that a lot of students are looking for. Obviously, daily life, living life, do students live on campus all 4 years? Do they have to live 1 year? Is there no housing provided after? That's something to really look into. The campus environment, obviously, size, location. Is it in an urban area? Is it out in the rural area? Is that what your student is looking for? How far from home is it? What's the feasibility in getting home? And then social life. What opportunities are there, enrichment opportunities outside of the classroom for your student? How do they foresee spending their weekends? Is that school aligned with what they're looking for? And then one thing that a lot of families don't have that conversation, which I would encourage you to with your student, is financial fit. I mean, this is a huge financial commitment for families. So having that conversation with your student to make sure that the schools that they're looking at and wanting to apply to align with your family dynamics.
Great. And Christina has a follow-up question about college visits. She says, are there ways to visit besides taking a general tour? I feel like the students need to see more than just a 2-hour view led by a very eager student or campus employee.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you go on those tours, I mean, they're wonderful. They give you the overview. You can see a dorm. They take you around to the student center and stuff. I recommend, if possible, spend some time on the campus, sit in the quad, watch students go to and from school, go into the dining hall, have lunch, sit in the student center, watch students commune, see what they do. And then for if your student already knows what majors they're interested in, see if you can make an appointment to meet with someone in that department, or if they can hook your student up with another student in that area of interest that they have. Or let's say your student's interested in drama, or they want to be in the band. Planning ahead of time, reaching out to the school, seeing if you can make an appointment to meet with someone, either a faculty member or a student who's involved in that organization. And then admissions offices will also help facilitate if your student wants to sit in on a class. So those are a variety of different ways that you can go about having a little bit more in-depth tour, in air quotes, of a school besides just the formal admissions session and campus tour guide visit.
Thank you, Kristin. All right, we have an anonymous attendee who is asking, because more schools are moving away from supplemental essays, do you think it's important to connect what you want to study in your personal statement?
I think, again, it depends. So because essays are just a component of the application. They're not looked at in a vacuum. Essays are looked at in the context of the entire application. So how the activities are packaged, what recommenders are saying about the student, like I've said when we came on today. And then, of course, what classes your student has taken. Have they shown their interest in, let's say, hypothetically, engineering is what they're interested in? Have they used electives to take engineering classes? Have they taken those harder math classes? So people don't realize, but your transcript actually tells a story about you. So those courses that your student takes tell some of that story. So while you could, if necessary, touch on what your student is interested in that essay, it isn't necessarily required or mandatory if there isn't a supplemental, if they are showing that interest, and hopefully they are, in other components of their application, courses they've taken, how they choose to spend their time outside of school, what their recommenders are saying about them.
Okay. And another parent wants to know, how are pre-college courses perceived? Are they looked at the same as a pay-to-play program?
Well, pre-college courses are, if they're taken at a university, in terms of for college credit, is that what the
this person is anonymous. So okay. If you're out there, if you could type in, but it says pre-college courses.
So pre-college courses come in a variety of different packages. There are the pay-to-plays where you're literally, going to a college and taking some courses, but you're not getting college credit for them. There is the opportunity to go to community colleges or an actual university and take a course and get credit for it, and a grade and a transcript. That is looked at very differently. And there are pre-college programs that are selective, where you actually have to submit an application, that there's a review process, and those are competitive, and those are viewed differently. So there are a variety of different ways to take pre-college courses, and those are viewed differently depending on which lane you're talking about.
Okay, and she did follow up saying not for credit, but through a college.
So if they're taking it at a local community college, if they're taking a class, that is looked at differently than going to a pay-to-play program at a different college. Yes, that would be looked at differently.
Thank you, Kristin. All right, how do you overcome one mediocre grade for an honors course during freshman year of high school? How do you determine what schools are reach, safety, on target? So that's two different schools, or two different questions. So the first, how do you handle one mediocre grade during ninth grade?
So if there is a reason for that mediocre, first of all, if it's just in ninth grade and then the student's program in 10th and 11th is, there's this upward trajectory, then that's compelling. It was, more often than not, I would see when I was at UVA, students, they're assimilating to high school. So ninth grade can be a little bumpy sometimes. But if they show that upward trajectory, then we understand that, they're maturing, they're assimilating, and that isn't really indicative of their aptitude and their abilities. If there is a reason for that grade, maybe they had a long-term sub, or they were put in the wrong class, or something else, some extenuating circumstances, that can be explained in the additional information section of the Common App. So the Common App has an optional area called the additional information section, of which there are two questions. One is a 300-word and one is a 250-word. And in both of those, you are given the opportunity to explain anything that an admissions evaluator could not glean from just reviewing the application. So it really would depend on the reasons for that and what is that mediocre grade. Are we talking a D? Are we talking a C? Are we just talking a B and all A's? I mean, I would have to know exactly what that transcript looked like, but you can explain anything in that additional information section.
Great. All right, our next question. How do you overcome, the second part of it. So how do you determine what schools are reach, safety, and target when you're building your balance list?
Sure. So colleges are going to look at your students' cumulative end of junior year GPA. So for those people who are rising seniors, you need to get the unofficial transcript from either the registrar or the guidance counselor of your student's school. And you can get that this summer, because that is what the college is going to be getting. Now, here we go again with it depends. It will depend on the college how that is viewed. At UVA, they look at the weighted cumulative GPA. At other schools, they will recalculate a GPA and look at core classes only. It will just depend on the school. But when you're determining your reach, targets, and safeties, you need to be looking at the GPA and test scores. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending if your student is a good test taker or not, testing is just important again. It was important before the pandemic and went out the window for the pandemic, during the pandemic, and it has systematically been coming back and being more important. You will see, I'm sure many of you know already, that there are colleges that have gone back to requiring testing. You're going to see, especially if your student is applying to a top 20 or a highly selective school, that more students are accepted who submit scores than those who do not. And so I would say right here, blanket statement, if you are applying to one of those highly competitive schools, you must submit a score. So GPA, testing, and then I'm sorry, I'm long-winded, Melissa. Then to determine the targets, reaches, and safeties, you look at those academic components, and then you want to look and see what the university that you're looking at, what the majority or the 50% of students are accepted to that school. For reaches, if it's a school that has a low acceptance rate, anything in the teens or single digits, it's a reach for everybody. For targets, that's again, you're going to look at the wheelhouse of your students, their academic profile. And then for safeties, I call them most likelies because college admissions is not an exact science. You're going to look at if your student's profile is higher than that specific school. And the other thing I want to say is what a lot of parents and students do is they focus on the reaches and they forget about the most likelies. I say do the reverse. Identify the most likelies that your student is happy with, that they would be fine or excited to go to, And if you have a few of those and those are locked and loaded, then you can, shoot for the moon, apply to the reaches, and fill out the rest of your list.
Excellent. All right, our next question is about extracurriculars. What types of activities are well regarded for college admissions? I've heard that high school clubs are no longer highly thought of.
Well, I don't know where this literally goes once again to the noise is out there that's incorrect. I don't know where you heard that high school clubs are no longer thought of. It depends on the club. It depends on your students' engagement in it. Have they been doing it all 4 years? Do they have a leadership role? Have they made an impact in that community? Colleges are looking at the communities that your students are part of, which I said when we first got on. And that could be either something outside of school, that could be a club in school, that could be family responsibilities, it could be a myriad of different communities, and they're looking for the impact that you've had in that community. So it's not necessarily the club title, it's what has your student done in that community to make an impact.
Great. All right, can you speak to how important the selected major is when the student is applying to a school? Does being undeclared put a student at a disadvantage?
I think people are going to maybe get frustrated when I say it depends. Once again, it depends on the college. There are some colleges that they don't care what you're going to major in. You're going into the College of Arts and Sciences, they don't care what your major is. There are other schools that you have to apply to a specific school. And there are schools that have direct admit. If you're applying for engineering or business or nursing or architecture, there are schools that have direct admit programs where you literally have to declare that major and you're going straight into that school. And then it will depend on that school, whether, let's say, hypothetically, you applied for architecture, you got in that school, you're in your first year and you're like, oh no, I don't like architecture. Like, how easy is it to get out of that school and go into a different one? So it literally will just depend on the college. And so I implore people to really do their homework, because also undecided looks different at different schools. There are schools that have specific exploratory programs where your student is going to have to meet with an advisor. They're going to have to take special classes. They're in, like, it's a special lane. And then there are others, if you go undecided, it just means you haven't declared yet. You don't have to do anything else. So it really is going to depend, and I apologize, but it's going to depend on the college that you're talking about.
All right, Catalina asked specifically, even before you started answering that question, wants to know particularly about UVA or similar highly selective schools that don't necessarily promote college exploration during freshman year. So what happens if her child starts as an engineering major, but then wants to switch to business after a year? Is it possible at schools like that to switch?
It's going to depend on the school. And at UVA, if you're going into, like, if you're going into the engineering school and you decide, you get there and you're like, I don't like it. Unfortunately, at UVA, they now have a direct admit business school, but you can also apply you go in direct, but you also have the opportunity to apply after. So the student would have to come out of engineering and then apply to business. They're limited spaces, maybe not as easy to get into. But it's just, as I said, it's going to depend on the school. You're going to have to look at each one of your student schools, see what the policies are for being able to change major, what's the requirement, because they're very specific. Like, you need to have taken these classes, have this GPA in order to switch to a different school and a different major. So you just really have to look at each one of the schools your student is going to be applying to.
Okay. Now, when you're talking about academic rigor, how do you recommend that students navigate potentially getting a B in an IB class or getting an A in an easier class? Do those equal out, or do they care whether the student is taking higher classes more or harder classes?
So that is another question that goes along with the question I get asked more than any other. Is it better to have a B in an IB or an AP class, or an A in a lower level class? And the answer is, you want to be in the class that you can get the best grade in. So if your student even though they do everything they can and they're going to be a B student in an IB class, they shouldn't be taking the IB class. That is my recommendation. Again, it will also depend on the school you're looking at, though. But yes, academic rigor is important for sure. So, there are students out there who can take a full IB diploma candidate program, take 13 APs, And then there are a lot of students who that's just not how they're wired. And so when you are determining where to put your foot on the gas and where not to, I always suggest the subjects that your student is interested in and that they find interesting and that they do well in, or they found easier, put your foot on the gas on those. And then the ones that are more difficult, that they're maybe not as interested in, then take your foot off the gas a little bit on those, if you have to choose. Now, that said, if your student is a STEM major, they want to go in anything related to math or science, you would want to be putting your foot on the gas in those math and science classes.
Okay. And another parent has a question along the same lines. How should we think about AP scores as part of the application process?
Yes. So before the pandemic, AP scores were important. So when I was at UVA and I saw a student took an AP class, I was looking for the score. Then it kind of went out the window, just like with regular ACT and SAT testing. And now it's systematically important, again, to see that. So you self-report your AP scores on the Common App under testing. And then depending on where your student matriculates, then you send the official scores from College Board. You don't have to send official scores when you're applying. But my recommendation is, if your student, and it also will depend on which AP subject we're talking about, like if they're a STEM student, you're definitely going to want to be submitting your science and your math score, your calculus scores and stuff like that. But I would say if your student has a 3 or above, which shows proficiency, they should be submitting their score.
Great. All right. The next parent is asking, people have said that even though you're not going test optional, college admissions takes that into account as like you didn't do good in school, or you didn't do good on the test. So if you do go test optional, is it true that you still get the same admissions chance as those who actually submit their test score? Or is it those that submit the test scores really do have more of an advantage?
Okay. So when I was at UVA, there were years when I was there when we didn't live in a test optional landscape. And then when we did live in a test optional landscape. So truly, when you are test optional, you do not penalize the student for not submitting scores. That said, students who submit scores tend to be more accepted to schools than not. And so when I initially, 4 years ago, was advising students whether submit scores or not submit scores, if we were looking at a school and I wanted their testing to be in the top 75% of students accepted to that school in order for us to submit. I have since changed that. Over the years, I've gone to 50%, and now I'm even going lower than that. But it has to be looked at in the context of the entire academic profile. So like if your student's testing, even if it's not in the 50% of a school that they're applying to, but it helps elevate their academic profile, we're going to submit. If it hurts their academic profile, then maybe we won't submit. It will just depend on the school. So you have to take every single school into account and make that strategic decision whether to submit or not submit. But I can tell you from how I'm counseling my own students is that we are tending to submit more often than not.
So much goes into it, and there really is a strategy, and it's dependent on each school. And I know you spend a lot of your summer months and early fall months doing just that with your students.
100%.
All right, let's see. Next question. Do the essays need to be beautifully and poetically written? These college essay podcasts that we're listening to, it seems all the essays sound like Pulitzer Prize short series or stories.
Okay, the first thing I would say is stop listening to the podcasts. Stop reading the essays, stop listening to the podcasts. This is your students' opportunity to tell their story. And what their story is very different than what those people are saying on those podcasts or those essays you're reading on the internet. And especially in the world of AI that we lived in, it's more important now than ever for your student to have their authentic voice come through on that essay. So a highly polished essay may not be the best thing to be submitting. The best essays I've read is when I can actually hear the student's voice in my head. And so I have a lot of students that come to me and they say, well, what do the colleges want to see? I need to have something unique. And I say to them, there are very few topics that are unique out there if someone's been in college admissions long enough. What is unique is your particular story. The topic is just the vessel that takes the reader on the journey. And your story is what you're trying to get across. You know, what your perspective is on something, what excites you, what you're passionate about, a challenge you've been through, whatever that is. And if you come to it from the standpoint of what do the colleges want to see, it's the kiss of death. It's what do you want to tell them? And my first question to all my students when we start doing essay topic brainstorming is, if you had 5 minutes with a stranger, 650 words, 5 minutes, what are some things that you would want them to know about you? That if they walked away, they would say, you know what? I have a little bit of a better idea of what's important to Melissa, what her perspective is on something, what she's passionate about, what she's been through, whatever that is. That's how I would go about this.
All right, great. Now, Shoba wants to know, she says, my son would hopefully get his associate's degree through community college along with his high school degree. The hope is that he can then get his undergraduate degree in 3 years. Will this be a deterrent in getting into college when he applies, when he's done?
No, it won't, because what he's doing is he's been taking those classes through dual enrollment and then getting his associate's degree. And so he's still considered first year status. If he was not doing that through dual enrollment, then he wouldn't be considered a first year student. He would be considered a transfer student. But no, that will not hinder him in any way.
And the next parent has a follow-up to that. Are community college classes taken as part of high school looked at favorably?
Yes. I mean, at most high schools, if you look at your school profile, your student's high school profile, you can see how they weigh classes. So honors classes at a lot of schools get a 0.5, AP, dual enrollment, and IB get an extra point. So dual enrollment is aligned from a point system with IB and AP. Now, that said, I can tell you for many colleges that AP and IB is considered more rigorous than dual enrollment because there's a uniformity to those with curriculum. And for dual enrollment, there is not the same uniformity.
Okay. And another parent says, how about DE classes? So that would be dual enrollment. How are they perceived? So
I just answered that.
We're good with that. All right. And then another follow-up on the same page. I took one AP and one DE and some honors during my junior year. I'm going to take 5 college level classes my senior year. Will colleges look down on my application because I didn't take as many college level classes during 11th grade? And what are colleges looking for your senior year? Are they even looking to see what you're taking and what your grades are?
So 100%, your senior program is your most important year. So while you may be applying early action to schools and they won't see your first semester grades unless you're deferred from that school, they won't see your grades. They will most definitely be picking apart your program. So good for you for challenging yourself and taking a really hard senior year. Now, with regards to your junior year, I would have to see that in the context of your entire application. And, you know, were you doing lots of things outside of school, or what are those classes that you took junior year? So I can't answer like how they'll evaluate your junior year, but I can tell you you're definitely doing the right thing by taking a really strong senior year program.
Okay. Next question. My son attended a public middle school and took algebra, got all A's, but he did not pass the algebra placement exam going into Catholic high school. He then had to retake algebra because of that as a freshman and got an A again, but now he's, quote, behind in math because he won't be able to take calculus by senior year. So the question is, will not reaching calculus be a make or break for him? He likely will not go into a math science major because he's interested in history or political science.
Again, it will depend on the colleges that he's looking at. For sure, you're 100% right. Calculus is now colleges like, depending on the college, selective colleges like to see calculus, especially if you're looking at a STEM or business. They definitely would like to see calculus. If your student is a history major, my question would be, what math are they taking in lieu of that? I assume if they took algebra in 9th, they took geometry in 10th, they took algebra 2 in in 11th. And so now in 12th, are they taking pre-calc? Are they taking
Yes.
trig? What are they taking?
Pre-calc and AP statistics senior year.
Perfect. Wonderful. So good for them that they're taking an AP math, because colleges are looking to see that you've gone as far as you can in the 5 core subjects: math, science, history, English, and believe it or not, foreign language is considered a core academic subject. So that was really smart of you to have your student take AP stats, but also still staying on that trajectory of taking pre-calc.
Okay. All right. Christina is asking, what do you recommend to students who are going into senior year feeling burnt out, perhaps wanting to drop some extracurriculars after September or October?
Well, I would say stick it out. Get yourself through January taking those extracurriculars, because you want to be able to put 12 on your common application because they're looking for depth and consistency. When I work with students with the activity section of the Common App, if you just attend a meeting once a month, or worked one time at a community service event, or only did something for 1 year, I don't want to see it. It's not important. It doesn't show that you've had any sort of real impact or commitment in a community. So I would tell your student, I know this is hard. I know there's a lot going on. This is tough, but we got to stick it out.
Okay. How do you highlight a bright student whose grades don't fully show their potential? For example, lower grades early in high school, stronger grades junior year. I know you kind of touched on this a bit before.
Yeah, I would 100% in the first question of the additional information section of the Common App, I would have your student write a little blurb, not a huge epistle, but a blurb about their academic journey, and that they have really celebrate their growth and where they are now as a student.
Okay. All right. Alina asks, are you familiar with TJ? I'm guessing she means Thomas Jefferson, and I know you have lots of students who go there. I've heard of excellent students going there and then having a hard time getting into Virginia Tech. What can you say about that?
So TJ is, for people who don't know, it's the charter school. It's a charter school in Northern Virginia. It is one of the best high schools in the country. I literally had a cheat sheet for myself to evaluate the program at TJ, because the courses that are offered at TJ are not offered at any other high school almost in the country. In STEM, they just go that deeply. The thing with TJ is it is such a highly competitive school, and you are looked at in the context of your high school. So you're being compared to the other high achieving students at TJ. That said, colleges will go more deeply into schools that are that rigorous.
Kristin, can you just explain what the high school profile is? This isn't a question, but I think parents of younger students might not be aware that high school profiles exist.
Sure, absolutely. I'm happy to do that. Thank you. Anything I say, Melissa, that you know that because I live in this world and sometimes forget that I'm saying things that maybe not everybody knows. So thank you for saying that.
Of course.
So the high school profile, it's called the school profile. And every single high school, whether you go to public or private school, has one. And if they don't have it published on their website, usually under the counseling section or the academic section, you can reach out to your counseling office and ask and say, I would like a copy of the school profile. So when high schools send your student's transcript and recommendations to the colleges that your student is applying to, they also include what's called the school profile. And it's usually 1 or 2 pages that really just give an overall summary of the high school. It tells kind of the demographics of the school, a little bit about the diversity of the school. It will say, we offer these AP classes, we offer these IB classes, these dual enrollments. This is how we handle higher level classes, or we don't offer any higher level classes, or we don't let students take high classes until junior year. So when an admissions person opens up a application, they need, you look at a transcript, unless you have the context of what that high school is offering, you don't know what you're looking at, like you're flying half blind. So when you see what the school offers, then you can evaluate the program rigor of the school. So those are sent along with the transcripts. And I do recommend everybody, if you have not seen your high school's school profile, ask for it or look on your school website.
Excellent. All right. Does a part-time job count as an extracurricular? And can you please explain a little more about what you mean by 12 extracurriculars on the Common App?
Okay, first of all, it's 10 extracurriculars on the Common App, not 12. Part-time jobs are awesome. I love it. I have students sometimes who'll be like apologetic. Oh, I work at Harris Teeter or I work at Chick-fil-A. I'm like, why are you apologizing? That's fantastic. Colleges love to see students who have jobs because, first of all, it shows responsibility, ability to work with other people, professionalism, being able to collaborate. It shows so many wonderful skill sets that colleges are looking for in applicants. So 100% put your job, part-time, whatever, on your application. There are 10 slots on the Common Application to put activities. You don't have to have 10, but if you have 10, fine, great. But they need to be quality, not quantity. So I can't tell you how many times I would be, as I said before, I would be reviewing an applicant, maybe 4 or 5 of them is something where they've done it for a number of years. Maybe they've had a leadership role, but either formally or informally, they've really made an impact in that community or shown how passionate they are in that community. And then it becomes, attended a meeting once a month, went and did a service project once. That's a waste of the admissions officer's time. They're really looking for quality, not quantity. So don't feel compelled to have 10 activities. Much better to have 3, 4, or 5 really strong ones than 10.
All right. Do you have any specific advice or strategies for a bright student with ADHD and ASD? And how do they find a good fit and how to overcome challenges in the admissions process?
Okay, so I work with a lot of students with learning differences that run, the entire spectrum. And so when you're looking at schools, and that I should have actually mentioned in the first question that Melissa asked me today, when you're looking at fit for schools, if your student has specific needs for support services, every college in the country is required by law to have a support services office, but they vary in what they offer. Some will offer, test accommodations, or if they need note taking, those types of things that maybe come with an IEP or 504. But sometimes students need more support, maybe meet with a counselor or an executive functioning coach once a week, have special classes. Maybe I've had students in the past who need living accommodations. So when you're looking at schools and you're looking for that fit, also look for the fit to your students' particular needs and start with the student services. Sometimes they call them student services or disability office. See what they offer because not all of them are the same.
Great. All right. Dima asks, how about capstones in senior year? How are they perceived, especially when taken instead of a class?
Right. I love capstones. I think they're fabulous. And I have a lot of students who are at ACC and do capstones. And we use those in a number of places. We also use them on their activity list because you spend so much time with that capstone, either doing the research or with an internship. And it really, I love to showcase and highlight that. I do the same thing with IB diploma candidates with their EE essays and their CAS project. I have that, if we have room, as an activity on their Common App activity list because they do spend such an inordinate amount of time on that outside of school that it really, just having the grade on their transcript doesn't really encapsulate the commitment and the really cool things that the student has done with regards to that.
All right, we have a follow-up to the last question about a student with ADHD. How should a student disclose at admissions that they are neurodivergent, or should they talk about overcoming challenges in their essay?
Okay. Again, well, first of all, I always say to my students, do you feel comfortable talking about it? That's the first and foremost. And if they do feel comfortable about it and they feel that it has been part of their journey, part of their story, you absolutely can talk about that in your common application. There isn't a stigma attached to it. And I have my students talk about it almost from a celebration, talking about what makes them unique, what makes them different, how they've dealt with it, what they've learned from it. Sometimes students deal with it in the topic of their essay, especially if they feel that that is really like that question that I said, if you have 5 minutes with a stranger, like they feel really compelled that that's what they want someone to know about them. But if they want to talk about something else about themselves, that additional information section that I talked about, the first question is where you can put in a paragraph about that journey and talk about what you've been through, how you've dealt with it, what you've learned from it, and celebrate it.
Excellent. Is getting into Calculus BC in senior year sufficient for most competitive engineering schools?
It's the minimum that you should have for engineering. I don't know exactly what you mean by competitive. Like, are we looking at top 5, top 10, top 20? That's the very, very minimum that you should have. You should have BC Calculus. You will be competing against students who have multivariable differential equations, linear algebra. You just will be. But you have to look at it in the context of your student's entire profile. I mean, maybe they're an engineer, but they also love to write, and they've taken AP English and creative writing. I always found those candidates super, super interesting because they're not really pointed and linear. They really use both sides of their brains. So it would really depend on what the entire program looks like, or maybe they've taken AP foreign language, which is fabulous. But BC is the minimum for sure.
All right, and we have 2 more questions about extracurriculars. One, is it still worth adding them, new clubs or extracurricular senior year? And then the second is if the student has participated in a bunch of different activities for the same sport, for example, like baseball, inside school, outside of school, should they include that in different sections, or is that one activity? And if they've had leadership positions in multiple different places.
Right. I mean, I actually just was reviewing and editing a student's activity list this morning who is a swimmer, but they've also been a paid swim instructor. They've been a volunteer coach, and they're also a lifeguard, which is, maybe a little off of that, but still hits. Oh, and they're also on they're on the high school team, but they're also on a club team. So I would, if there's room, separate, because you're talking about different skill sets. And for people who are not students or not rising seniors, what I didn't mention is that in the activity section of the Common App, you only have 150 characters. That's not words, that's characters. That's not even a sentence to talk about your impact and your role in that activity. So when we separate, especially if we're talking leadership or we're talking like real deep involvement or awards or whatever, separating them will allow you to showcase that real, like all those different components that your student has been able to do if they have room.
And Kristin, do you think it's worthwhile to add new clubs and activities senior year?
Right. That was the first question. No. Unless it is something like they're going straight into a leadership role. I always say, especially for my students who are going into senior year and like maybe we need some more volunteer work, or we need to have a little bit more in depth in something that they're currently interested in. So if I have a student, hypothetically, who is really interested in healthcare, and they decided kind of late in the game that they're interested in healthcare, but they were part of a medical kind of provider club at school, they've done some shadowing, then I would say, hey, let's add another component to this interest you already have going. Let's put in some volunteer work. Why don't you go volunteer at the Red Cross, or reach out to Special Olympics or Best Buddies, showing the care for others, or maybe you go volunteer at a senior center or a senior retirement home. So it's not like we're adding a whole new and different thing. We're taking current interests and we're just elevating them. So that would be my recommendation to whoever asked that question. Look at your students' what they're currently doing. And if you want to add things, add another dimension to what they're currently doing. Don't come in from left field with something totally different. Unless, like I got an email this morning from one of my students, I just got a full-time nanny job that I'm going to be doing during the school year. Okay, great. That's fabulous. I mean, we'll add that. That's a job. But otherwise, instead of like adding clubs and that kind of stuff, I would just elevate what you're currently doing.
Okay, we have a few more extracurricular questions. So I know you said quality over quantity, but should I put a sport that I spent my whole high school outside of school doing for numerous hours each week, but have never held a leadership position? Should I still list
Yes,
it?
100%. Yes, definitely. If you've been doing that all 4 years, you're spending a tremendous amount of time because it's not just all leadership. And first of all, leadership takes lots of forms. Not everyone can be president of the class and captain of the team. If you help younger players on your team, if you help mentor them or guide them, or you provide support to the coaches in some form or fashion, or maybe you help bring the positivity, or when you guys are doing team huddles, you're doing the cheers, like really think outside of the box. It doesn't all have to be titles. They're looking for it's soft skills really too. What are you contributing? 100%. Please put that activity that you've been spending all this time on your sheet, on your activity list.
Okay, and this is kind of similar. A parent is asking, should I be concerned that my son's participation in a travel sport is taking up all of his extracurricular time? If that's his main interest in extracurricular, but it's not related to what he's going to do in college, is that looked at favorably, or how would a college look at that?
So, I mean, colleges definitely know the time that's put into a sport at a certain level. I went to college on a swimming scholarship, so I know exactly how much time is required when you're competing at a certain level. And colleges do know that. And you'll also be saying in the activity section, you have to put hours per week, weeks per year. And so that will be articulated the amount of time that they've spent there. So that will be looked at. But what I hope your student has done in that sport that they're involved in is that they have contributed to that community, not just from their athletic ability. That they've been a supportive teammate, that like I talked about in the last one, that they've had soft skills. Maybe they can add, I have a lot of students in the past who've done that same thing with being an athlete, and we need more volunteer work and they just don't have the time. And I'm like, you have a captive audience on your team. Why don't you go and get a bunch of your teammates together, and why don't you guys volunteer, like do a team volunteer day at Habitat of Humanity? Or why don't you guys run a used sports equipment drive? Or why don't you volunteer your time for something, a day at school or something of that nature? So you can take the activities that your student is currently involved in, and as I said, try to find additional ways to add dimension to what they're currently doing.
All right, can you give some examples of activities that may be related to public health track or major, which may be different from medical?
So that's where I would say anything that shows the skills of, are we talking about public health policy, or is that what, because that person follow up? Are they looking for advocacy, policy in public health? What are they trying to do?
While we wait for them, this is a quick one. For the activity section, should they use bullet points or sentence format?
So I have my students separate with either commas or semicolons, because bullet points, you're not going to be able, you only have 150 characters. So like you can't, and the way it comes off, like when your student finishes their Common App, press preview and you can see what the Common App's going to look like for that admissions officer. And you want to, it can come out, sometimes it can look wonky. So look at your essay, look at how the activities look. Don't use bullet points, but you'll be able to see the formatting, and you want it to be as the easiest readability because they're not spending a ton of time on an application for them. So I wouldn't use bullet points though.
All right, going back to the other question, it's a school of public health, so not necessarily policy related. So what kinds of activities would be good for a student interested in that?
So I think from even an independent project they could do, I think they could do some research in their own community and identify needs, societal needs in their current community, and put together a research project and solutions on how to deal with whatever the public health issues. Maybe there's food insecurity in their community that they can touch into, and then they can go volunteer at a food bank. So identify certain societal things in their current community, and then you can combine research, volunteer work, and I don't think any courses at school that would fall into that line, but I would do that.
All right, great. What if my child took PE in the summer to open a study hall in 10th grade? Child did this to help with her high level courses, two APs and two honors, and did this to help also because she has ADHD and a learning difference. Will colleges look down on her for not taking another elective? That's part one. And then I'll ask part two.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I would explain I mean, I hope she's going to touch on her learning differences in the additional information section. You're not going to be penalized. I mean, she's taking hard classes. And so I think it actually is a tribute to her that she understands that she needs additional time in order to challenge herself. She needs that study hall.
All right. And what's your recommendation for a student who's twice exceptional, but getting A's in AP classes and honors? Should they still tell colleges? I'm guessing they mean about the learning differences.
If they feel comfortable talking about it, if they feel that it is attributed to their story, then sure, they should talk about it. If they feel it isn't, I have other students who are like, no, I don't, I have it and I cope with it and I'm fine. And I don't really, doesn't define me. It doesn't define anyone basically, but they don't feel like they want to add that to their story. So I really would ask your student how she feels about that. Let me go back to the study hall person. I was just thinking for a second on the study hall person. The colleges are most concerned with those 5 core academic classes. Electives are lovely in that they show interest, in fine arts, in business, in engineering, and those are all fabulous. But in the final analysis, those 5 core academic subjects are the most important. So if your student has to choose, because not everybody, can do everything, your student is doing the right thing by focusing on the core academic classes.
Great. All right. There is a parent who's asking, can we have more discussion about elementary school families since a decision about math class impacts during these years will eventually impact their math and science options during high school and therefore college admissions. And Kristin, I know you don't work with elementary school students, but we have lots of families that do come to us starting in 8th grade because they are concerned about things like these.
I have consulted 6th graders. I've had plenty of 6th, 7th, and then more 8th graders, but I have gone even younger than that. And that's a wonderful question. And we could have a whole discussion about whether this is right or wrong in the US educational system that students already have to be targeted and profiled in elementary school. But my job with all my students is to give them as much options as possible. So if your student it finds math easy, has the aptitude, it's not challenging for them, I would to keep all options open because who knows what they're going to want to do when they're in high school. I mean, who knows what they're going to want to do in college? I say to all my students, it's okay if you don't know what you want to do. I'm in my late 50s. I still don't know what I want to do with my life. So, but in order to give your students the most options available, I would, if they're good in math, go for the trajectory of that track and just play it each year, reassess, reevaluate, and touch in with your student. How are you feeling? How are they doing? Touch in with the teachers and then adjust accordingly.
Okay. We have a question about highly selective high schools like TJ, for example. If a child gets into a school like that, how should we decide whether they should go there or attend their local public school or a private school instead?
It's a great question. I actually met with a family earlier in the spring who the student was accepted to TJ, and we went through that whole dialogue of should they go to TJ or should they go to their local high school. And that is a tough call. And I think my first thought would be to really include your student in that conversation because they're the ones who have to go to the school and do the work and really listen to them about how they feel about that. I have also worked with students where they were at TJ and they left TJ and they went to their local high school. So it's a wonderful school and it's right for a lot of people and is amazing. And for other people, not so much. So I think I would really have your student spend some time there, go to their local high school, to spend some time there, look at the programs, talk about what their thoughts are, what their future goals are, and then make your determination.
Okay, great. I want to say we have less than 5 minutes. Kristin has an appointment with a family at exactly 1, so we're going to have a hard stop, and I have 5 questions left. If we don't get to your question, we will try to follow up with you. If you wrote it as an anonymous question, we won't be able to see your email address. So if it's important to you, if you could just respond with your name, and then I can look up your email address. Next question. How do we use the high school profile to inform the application process?
The high school profile is getting sent to the colleges. So they're going to know, they're going to see it, they're going to know it. And most colleges read by region and read by high school. So over time, if a person is a seasoned admissions evaluator, they know the high school already. And then sometimes they just kind of familiarize themselves if they need to with regards to that. But they're going to have that. That is your counseling office's responsibility to send that.
Okay. My son did well in ninth and 10th grade with AP classes, but then took 6 IB courses in 11th grade and got C plus and Bs. So I'm not sure what his strategy should be in the application process. He is taking summer courses at a community college and getting A's. Um, so will he be successful again with the GPA?
So if I got his transcript, I mean, there's definitely a story to tell on that transcript, and he needs to tell that story. So in that additional information section, I think he needs to address that junior year. Because if he's getting A's now at the community college, what was going on during junior year? That obviously is not indicative of his aptitude or his abilities, and he needs to explain that a little bit.
Okay. What if a school's offerings change? So, for example, if they didn't offer a lot of courses when your child was in ninth grade, but by the time they're a senior, they've offered a lot more, will my child be at a disadvantage? And should they explain that?
So they should not be penalized. You can't be penalized for not taking classes that aren't offered. Your high school should have that on their school profile. If they don't, or I would highlight that in the number one essay of the additional information section, just to be sure that they know this, that it just reminds that reader that, hey, they did not offer those classes to my student in ninth and 10th grade.
Okay. All right, let's see one more. Does an IB program put a student interested in STEM at a disadvantage if their high school doesn't offer calculus, but instead offers IB analysis as the top math?
That question is the question I've been dealing with for the last year. And that I may be an unpopular opinion with this, but if I am now getting to the orientation where I used to say if you had the IB diploma, you know, top rigor, and you still have top rigor. But if you want to go into STEM, now the way things are going in college admissions, you're 100% right. You're at a disadvantage that you haven't taken calculus. So I would, if possible, have your student take calculus outside of that IB program. I've had to fight with one school about that analysis class versus getting it to the other IB math that does include the calculus. And you're right. They are at a disadvantage. They are.
All right. And Kristin, real quick, last question. Do you have space right now to take on more students?
I don't have space for rising seniors right now, but I do have space in all other grades. My job with all my seniors is we want to be done with the entire common application by the end of July. And I have many students who are done with the entire process before they go back to school. So depending on how that works with my current students, I may open a slot or two for rising seniors. But currently right now, unless it's a referral coming from a family, I'm only taking referrals for rising seniors. But all other grades, yes, definitely.
Great. And just one note, we have lots of other college consultants who are taking on high school seniors. So if you have a student in any grade and you're interested in having someone like Kristin strategize with you and be there for every step of the whole application process, you can schedule a call anytime. I just put a link in the chat box and one of our program managers can answer all your questions and give you more details. So, Kristin, I know you have to run. This has been so fantastic and we appreciate it. And we actually got to all the questions except one, which is amazing. So thank you for your time. And thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Melissa.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.